Good morning and welcome to the Point. The Michigan State Legislature returned to Lansing this past week. There are a number of big items that they'll try to deal with even in this election year. But before they can start on that, there is another issue that has arisen, and that is the water crisis in Flint. There were protests this week in Lansing. Two state representatives were there and join us this morning. We start with Representative Chris Affendoulis. Representative, I wanted to talk to you about a new session, a year, an election year, when people are not always terribly optimistic about a lot of things happening in Lansing. But before I do, I'm going to talk to you about something that has developed in the last 2 weeks that finally erupted into a protest at the Capitol earlier this week calling for Governor Snyder's resignation. And that's the Flint water problem. Now, first, you're not from Flint. Second, you had nothing to do with the emergency manager appointment. So I don't ask from that standpoint, but I ask from the standpoint of how much conversation is that creating in Lansing?
I think, Rick, first I would say, when the legislature was asked to act last fall, we acted very swiftly to provide finances for the reconnection to the Detroit water supply, and to try and bring ourselves up to speed as much as we could on the incident and in terms of what happened. We got some briefings on that. I think now obviously it's in the forefront because we're realizing that just rehooking up isn't going to solve the problem. Interestingly, I asked some people here in Grand Rapids, I said, well, what did we do in Grand Rapids? We must have lead pipes in Grand Rapids. And they said, well, we've been treating our water since 1983 so that it coats there's a coating that goes on the pipes so the lead does not leach in. Lead pipes are a reality in a lot of U.S. cities, especially in older infrastructure. So yes, it's coming up. There were decisions made over the years before and after the emergency manager that I think have contributed to this. But we stand at the ready to do what's asked of us. As you said, it's a issue with the executive departments of the government trying to get in there. And obviously, you have a public health crisis, and we're trying to address that as best we can. Filters, water, the rehooking up obviously was a critical part. So we're stand at the ready to do what we need to do when we're asked.
This is, and I don't want this to dominate our segment, but just one more question about this. This is, as you correctly identified, a public health issue, but it has quickly been turned into a political issue as well. How much of that is playing out in the legislature?
I think we're starting to hear that, that you're getting into the blame game. I think when you look back at when the water originally came out of the pipeline and out of the Flint River, from everything I understand, the testing said, this is fine. It's once it got into the pipes is where the issue and the nature of the river water being different than the water from the Detroit system or from one of the Great Lakes. So, but it is playing out politically. I think people understand it, but I think what we need to do is be cautious and say, look, there's investigations going on that really do all the fact finding that we need to do, and then let's make some judgments later.
Let's talk about this legislative session. I know that you've just gotten back to work, and I know that there's a lot to do. One of the big things that has already started is funding for Detroit public schools. And the question about Detroit public schools is as broad and long as it can be because it's unclear as where the future will be for those schools. But what do you think in terms of what the legislature may do? Because if I understand it correctly, a plan put forward was pretty quickly nixed by Democrats who said that's not the way they want it to go. So this is not a done deal.
Clearly, there was legislation, I believe, introduced yesterday by Senator Jeff Hansen. I've not reviewed that yet. I think when you go back and you look at, the district is bleeding money. That's a fact. It has a $3.1 billion debt. Some people say, well, just let it go bankrupt. Well, the difference between a school district going bankrupt and a municipality going bankrupt is the state is on the hook for public debt for education for school districts. So the state, we've got to take some action. What form it takes, whatever the solution is, we've got to keep the focus on the kids, A. And B, we have to have some long-term structural changes so that we just don't continue to have these losses and that the district can operate in a prudent financial way. So I think that all that's going to play into it, but it obviously is highly politically charged as well. But I think from a per student basis, we spend more in Detroit as much as anywhere else in the state. So the question is, what is the stewardship of that money? what is the, what happened. We've had 30 years of mismanagement, basically. I understand we have an emergency manager in there now. We're trying to get all these things figured out, but it is, as you say, it's very complex, and it's going to take a lot of discussion, a lot of deliberation to see where we land.
We just talked about two issues that are vitally important. One is the public health, safety, and welfare. The other is the education of students.
Right.
And in both cases, not only are they important issues, but they're very politically charged issues, and this is an election year. All of your colleagues are up for election, re-election, term limited out, whatever it is. There are 110 seats that'll be up for grabs. What do you think, and I realize this will be your first time through a cycle like this, but what do you think, what is your perception of what that's going to do to the ability to handle the really important heavy lifting that needs to be done? Because traditionally, I can tell you as an observer, the big stuff doesn't get done in election years.
Well, I think if you look at it, these are two really big issues, right? So we have to get those taken care of. And I think they will dominate a lot of the calendar. It all depends how things roll out, what deliberations go on behind the scenes. I would say that the other things that we have to look at, we have a lot of people that want to see a continued fiscal responsibility of the state. We've got to get through our budget process. We have some challenges, although the state is doing relatively well fiscally. We had a pretty big rollover of funds from 2015. Lapsing into 2016. We had the revenue conference yesterday where the consensus estimate is that we're only down $150 million from our last estimate, which for fiscal 2016, which I think makes it a little bit easier to address some of the issues for 2016, especially with the lapsed funds. How we do that, where we put that money, a lot of people are saying, hey, let's put that in the rainy day fund. Some people are saying, let's give a tax cut. But we have some issues for the fiscal 17 budget that are going to have to get addressed. Medicaid, I've been given responsibility for the Medicaid subcommittee. It's about almost one third of the state budget. So it's pretty amazing how large it is. And we have some issues there with a use tax that's going to be not going to be able to be collected after December 31 of 2016. We have to look at how we're going to fill in for those funds. We have the HICA tax, which may have to be the extension of the sunset. Doesn't affect 17 as much as it does 18. This was part of the road discussion. Those are the things that have to get done as well. But the two big issues that you mentioned at the outset, they are the issues of the day, and we're going to have to address them.
Well, when you talk about Medicaid, though, there is another factor there, and that's the expansion of that program that the governor was adamant had to be done as part of the Affordable Care Act. And he said it was a priority for him. He flew back early from Israel to say that he wanted to get this done. Had quite a fight with the legislature and got it done, but there's a real cost issue associated with that in the out years. Is that something you're dealing with now?
Yes, so we're going to have to, remembering that there's two pieces. You have the traditional Medicaid, which I was talking about at first, and then you have the Healthy Michigan program, which the state has not paid anything for the Healthy Michigan program to date, and it won't through fiscal 16, but in fiscal 17 it will have to pay 5%. Estimate of that is about $130 million. I think as we start to look at the budget, that will be in the general fund, that will be something we've really got to consider. How are we going to find the dollars for that? Because something else, although we do have revenue growth forecast, at least for fiscal 17, something else may have to be, we may have to cut somewhere else, or we may have to just reprioritize.
I'm interested in talking about your responsibility, particularly when it comes to Medicaid, because it is such a big part of the budget and it is such an important part for the state. But I also want to move on to another issue that I think is going to come to the forefront perhaps sooner than later, and that is the energy policy that the House wanted to deal with late last year. The Senate was not going to deal with it before the session was over, and so consequently, it's still out there. Is that something you think the House and Senate will try to do this year?
I definitely think there's going to be an effort. I think we need to see some amendments. I think really the key thing that it's such a big issue in terms of we're closing these 9 coal-powered electrical plants in the state. So, but even closing those, we don't necessarily have a capacity issue, at least not 3 years. Right now, Michigan actually is an exporter of electricity. The big issue comes down to that there's a portion of the market that is on choice. 10% of the market, but it actually is now about 13%. And this includes such a wide variety of entities, private businesses, public schools, hospitals. I mean, so you have people that would be on a different spectrum politically, but are all in favor of electrical choice. So it's made it a very interesting debate. Representative Gary Glenn has really carried the torch for the choice side of it. Within the structure of the current bill, I think what a lot of people would like to see is if we need new generation and the MPSC determines that there is new generation needed, that consumers and DTE wouldn't have the exclusive right to build the new plants, that other providers would be able to come in, IPPs, independent power producers, would be able to come in and say, hey, we'll generate this electricity in Michigan and then we'll sell it into the grid. So now I know DTE and consumers say, hey, we do competitively bid our projects so that we're getting a good price on the construction. So there's some nuance there, and that's a point of contention between both sides. I think we have really, Rick, we have a hybrid system. Not a lot of states have. Most states are either fully regulated or fully choice. Right. We've got this hybrid system where we've got a piece of the market as at choice, and what some people will tell you is you should be one or the other fully, and that where you're not, you actually have a cross subsidy. Somebody is subsidizing the people that are on the choice program because they're paying less than the people that aren't. And it's hard to get in the choice program. It's full and there's a waiting list to get on it. And so I think we've got to see, I always want to look at this and say, what's going to be best for the consumer? How are we going to lower electrical rates? What's the best way to do that? And so that will be my kind of touchstone as I look at how I'm going to end up voting on this bill.
We're almost out of time, but I know you have your own priorities as we get ready to go into the year. We'll hear from the governor this coming week. He'll talk in his State of the State. What do you want to get done?
Well, obviously, that Medicaid is such a big thing. That's my top priority, is my responsibility that's been given to me on how we're going to spend that money. And are there opportunities for us to save and provide the services better? And there I've been going on, taking a lot of tours, meeting with a lot of the stakeholders, trying to understand where we're at on that. One of the things we have to cover in Medicaid that hasn't been covered heretofore, we're the only state that doesn't do it, is hepatitis C. So that's a financial cost there. Trying to understand all these things and make sure we give everyone a fair hearing. And Michigan has really been on the forefront for many years in how it delivers Medicaid service. It's kind of used as a model. And so we're just going to try and make that better. And the other thing is I worked on getting rid of some old laws work group last year, and we did get some public acts signed on, and that was a nice process. But we're going to try and expand that this coming year and maybe take on some issues that aren't, singing the national anthem a certain way. I think everyone could get behind that. But maybe some things that are a little bit more controversial, or where people actually are actually serving time. And we say, hey, is that something we need to revise and look at?
You've heard from Republican Chris Afendoulis. Democrats also have a take on the legislative agenda and on Flint. You'll hear that when we come back to the point. Welcome back to the Point. There are some big legislative issues that lawmakers may be dealing with in this election year. You heard in our first segment the Republican point of view. Now, starting first with that Flint water crisis, here's Democrat Winnie Brinks. Representative, I wanted you to come in first of the year, talk about priorities for you, for the state, and for the legislature. We're going to get to that, but I've got to start, as I did with Representative Afendoulis, and talk about the developments from the Flint water system and the health emergency that it's created there. Not so much because the legislature is going to be tasked to solve it, although you may well be asked to do more, but to get an idea of what this is creating within the legislature, because obviously there were protests this week in the state capitol. What is a very serious health emergency, a condition of health and the welfare of the people in Flint, has also been turned into a pretty big political football. So you've got those two separate things going on. How is this impacting, or is it impacting, the legislature?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me in. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Rick. The Flint water crisis is really a very disturbing development that we've had happen here in our state. It's really unfortunate that it's got to this. Clearly, things should have been done differently much sooner. So I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that the problem is being solved and that the people of Flint have good, clean, safe drinking water right now. Starting yesterday, really, or before that, of course. That first and foremost is our concern, my concern, and whatever the legislature needs to do in terms of appropriations or something like that, we need to be there for the people of Flint because the state appointed emergency manager bears a significant amount of responsibility for the mess that was created there, and certainly that flows up, if you will, to the executive officer. So we need to make sure that we're taking the responsibility as a state that is appropriate. So solving the immediate crisis, but then taking steps to make sure that the DEQ and any department of our state government that's responsible for safe, clean drinking water is doing what it's supposed to do to fix what's going on in Flint and to prevent it from happening anywhere else in the state.
The program that you just outlined is all about finding solutions and all about making sure it doesn't happen again. There's some people that just immediately go for getting rid of people. We already know that the head of DEQ has resigned and others have left, perhaps others will. Is it more important to solve the problem than to place blame, or is the issue right now fixing the water?
First and foremost, we need to fix what's going on right now. That's the health and well-being of our kids. It's the health and well-being not just today and tomorrow, but it's their ability to learn. Permanent brain damage can be caused by lead exposure. So this is a long-term consequence that we need to fix immediately. So that must be our first priority. After that, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, as there should be, and the people of Michigan have a right to hold those responsible accountable. So whatever that looks like, I'm sure that we will continue to have that conversation for many weeks.
Let's talk about this legislative session. What's going to happen? I know there are big things out there. Detroit Public Schools has already started to be dealt with over in the Senate. I think many Democrats said that they did not like the plan that Senator Hansen came up with. Where do you fall down on that?
So the Detroit Public Schools is certainly a big issue that we need to deal with as a state. It's the largest system in the state, and a lot of kids there have not been served well for many years. Again, this is a situation where it's been 7 years under a state-appointed emergency manager. That has not been a productive solution to the issues going on there. So a couple of things that I'd like to see happen are some return to local control. We can talk about a hybrid kind of arrangement if we need to, but I think that needs to be an element of this, because clearly just the state takeover is not a productive solution. Financially speaking, I'm certain that there will be a need for the state to come in and help out in a productive way with that. I think we need to make sure that we're not penalizing all the rest of the students around the state by taking, there's been talk of taking up to $50 per pupil out of the school aid fund from everybody to pay for the issues going on in Detroit Public Schools. Well, I think it's important for us to find a solution. We need to do it without penalizing the other students throughout the state.
When you look at the Detroit Public Schools, in one way or the other, the state's going to be on the hook for the money.
Right.
I mean, that's just
unfortunately that's the way it is. Yeah.
That's the way it's going to work out. What is the better plan? Is this a matter of finding other revenue outside of the school aid fund to go in and do to fix the problem? And then if you do that, and you were talking about local control, how do you guarantee it doesn't develop itself again?
Right, so I think there can be some safeguards put in place alongside of local control or restoring some local control. We need to be able to have that community hold their elected officials accountable for things and to have some feedback into what their school systems look like. The folks that still remain in Detroit that are committed to those schools and who need those schools should have a voice there. So definitely need to find a way to make that happen. So does the state need to step in and be of assistance? Yes, absolutely. Exactly what that looks like, I haven't seen a very good model for yet, but clearly just a state takeover has not worked.
One of the big issues that was dealt with last year to a partial extent, at least in the hearings, was an energy policy change in the state of Michigan. That is still far from done. And it's an enormously complex issue. We've done 8 or 9 shows right here with all different entities, people from the very same political backgrounds with diametrically opposed views. This is very complex, but it's also very important for the state. Can you get something like that done, something that is so broad, so long range, that may have more from my perspective, it probably has more financial impact on the state than the roads deal, for example, because this is energy for a long period of time. Can you get that done in an election year?
That's a very good question. I guess that remains to be seen. I'm hopeful that we can come up with some productive solutions. There, as you mentioned, there are folks on both sides of the aisle that are all over on this issue in terms of what they are willing to support or what they want to prioritize in these policies. I think it's important for us to remember we do need to meet renewable standards. We do need to make improvements there. And that will be good for us in terms of health and well-being of our citizens, which is of course very important, but there's also a lot of opportunities here in terms of developing good paying jobs, local energy, reducing our dependence on outside sources that are both not good for us and potentially more expensive and come at some political cost. So there's some great opportunities here, and I'm hopeful that folks on both sides of the aisle can come together and find some middle ground that is acceptable to the people of Michigan and ultimately puts them first.
As a practical matter, this may be one of the least polarized issues from party standpoint.
Correct.
Because you have, like you say, you have
Yes.
Republicans and Democrats in this camp and Republicans and Democrats in this camp. Let's talk about you. What are your priorities as we move into a new year? Obviously, again, I point out, and people tire of this, and they say, oh, Rick, it's not that bad. But look, election years are notorious for not getting lots and lots of things done. 109 of your colleagues, or there are a couple empty seats, but they're all up for re-election, or there'll be new folks running. So it is a big election.
Yes, it is. And of course, that's going to have an impact on the reality that we need to work within in Lansing. My priorities, as you know, have been for the last couple of years, I've had a big focus on the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans, so that continues to be on my radar. I've got a bill that would appoint an ombudsman to the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans. You know, there's a children's ombudsman, there's an ombudsman for prisoners in our state, and I think that the veterans over at the home deserve that kind of accountability for the care that they've received. We've had lots of issues come to our attention in terms of some problems over there, and I think this is one step that would help improve the accountability and improve the care there, because ultimately an ombudsman would be about finding solutions.
And finding a voice.
And finding a voice, an appropriate voice that's not within the system that is providing the services. It'd be somebody who's objective. So that's one of my priorities. Something else that I think we need to do much better, and I serve on both the Workforce and Talent Development Committee and the Education Committee, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to improve the way we're helping kids, students, young people get prepared for productive jobs of the future. And we know, seeing projections for what our economy in West Michigan, the kinds of jobs that we're producing in manufacturing and IT, in the medical field, even in agriculture, we know that we are not going to be able to meet the demand with the current education preparation that we are providing to our kids. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and I'd really like to see us do some productive work on that area. So again, you know, without the proper education, without the right preparation, our kids won't be able to provide the companies that are here, that want to stay here, with the appropriate talent that they need. So really it's important for us from a business perspective, from a family perspective, from a career and talent development perspective, to make sure we're doing that better.
No matter what the issue, the Flint water crisis, Detroit public schools, even legislative reform when it comes to criminal justice, and of course that big energy policy debate. All of those things will have to be dealt with in the environment of an election. And it will be interesting to see what impact that coming election will have on those items, something we'll be watching throughout the year. And we'll have more when we come back to The Point. So now the legislative session will get underway, but not before Governor Rick Snyder gives his State of the State address later this week. It will be interesting to see how much of that is about his agenda for the coming year and how much he has to deal with that water crisis in Flint. We'll be there Tuesday night for complete coverage of that, and of course, we'll have a recap here next Sunday morning. When you join us, as I hope you will, every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 or To The Point.